You may now kiss the—" The officiant's words were drowned out by a jarring mechanical whir slicing through the gentle music and rustling leaves, snapping every head skyward. There, hovering ominously above the altar, right between the couple and the vibrant blue spring sky, was a black, bulky drone buzzing like a digital vulture. It wasn't the photographer's. This thing crackled with a tiny speaker barking about an unauthorized gathering. The bride's veil fluttered. In the breeze, the groom's jaw tightened, and in a split second he gave a sharp nod toward a wooden cage tucked behind a nearby bush. The best man sprang into action, flinging it open, and out burst a shadow of feathers and fury, a massive hawk named Vaco, soaring upward with wings cutting the air like blades. Guests gasped as the drone darted to escape, but Vaco trained for high-altitude rescues and sharp as a razor, locked on with lethal precision in a jaw-dropping mid-wedding takedown. The bride, stunned, whispered, "Did that really just happen?" The groom, eyes still on the sky, smirked. "She brought drones. I brought justice." Just 3 weeks earlier, Melissa hadn't even dreamed of a backyard wedding. She'd always pictured a fancy venue with glittering chandeliers and comically tall centerpieces. But Jake had other ideas, convincing her to trade tradition for something unforgettable. Which city of the United States are you watching from? Drop a comment and share with us if you have any confrontation with the HOA. We'll narrate your story on our channel. His family farm had charm, a lake, an oak tree that looked like something from a fairy tale, and best of all, it was far enough from town to avoid HOA nonsense, or so they thought. Melissa was a middle school art teacher who loved watercolor and glitter pens. Jake trained birds of prey for emergency response teams and taught wilderness survival workshops to kids on the weekend. They were an unlikely pair, one all pastels and cardigans, the other flannel and leather gloves, but they made each other laugh every single day. Their love story wasn't flashy, it was real, and they wanted their wedding to be the same. Planning was a breeze. They invited family and close friends, set up a stage by the oak tree, ordered a barbecue truck, and arranged hay bales for seating. Jake even built a small wooden stand to hold Vaco, his most trusted hawk, because, of course, Vaco would be part of the ceremony. Everything was perfect. That is, until Karen found out. Karen wasn't invited. She wasn't even supposed to know. But the town was small, and Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, had eyes and ears everywhere. Her friend Denise, who ran the local salon, let it slip while giving Melissa a trim. Karen had stormed out of her spin class and showed up at Jake's property within the hour. Karen didn't knock. She never knocked. She marched straight into the backyard like she owned it. Her pearl sunglasses perched high on her head like a crown. Behind her was Craig, the HOA's least effective yet most obedient clipboard carrier. "You're hosting a public event," Karen announced, stepping right onto a just-laid aisle runner. "There are regulations, guidelines, protocols." Jake, polite to a fault, reminded her that the farm was not under HOA jurisdiction. Karen pretended not to hear. She pointed at Vaco's perch. "And what is that?" "A dangerous wild animal. You're going to have a predator at a wedding." Melissa tried to explain that Vaco was trained, certified, and actually safer than most neighborhoods' dogs, but Karen wasn't there to listen. She was there to control. By the end of the conversation, she had declared the wedding an unauthorized gathering within shared HOA airspace and vowed to escalate it. Craig nervously took photos. That night, while Melissa was stringing fairy lights, a drone buzzed low over the yard. Jake stood silently beneath it, eyes locked upward, arms crossed. The drone hovered for a few minutes, then zipped off. Melissa asked if it belonged to the photographer. Jake shook his head. "Karen's testing the waters," he said. "She's measuring how far she can push before we push back." Melissa wanted to ignore it, to let it go, but Karen didn't stop. Over the next few days, the drone returned. First, just watching, then playing recorded messages. "This is a restricted zone. It would squawk, or this event is not HOA approved." Guests helping set up grew uneasy. One cousin tried to shoo the drone with a rake. Another accidentally hit it with a foam bat. Karen filed noise complaints. She tried to have Jake cited for keeping livestock too close to a residence, even though the livestock in question was a goat named Walter, who mostly just napped under the porch. But Jake was calm. Always calm. Too calm, Melissa thought, until she saw him setting up the Hawk's launch post next to the altar. "What are you planning?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "Insurance," he replied, "in case HO warfare turns aerial." He gave Vo a soft pat and whispered something into the bird's feathers. Melissa wasn't sure whether to laugh or panic. She chose to laugh, but deep down she knew Karen wasn't finished. On the morning of the wedding, everything shimmered. The sun hit the lake just right. The sky was pure blue, the kind that begged to stay cloudless. Guests arrived early, greeted by mason jar lemonade and acoustic guitar covers. Melissa walked down the aisle in her mother's lace dress, smiling so wide it hurt. Jake stood waiting, holding back tears. They had made it. Through the planning, the panic, the patrol drones, they were here together. But just as the officiant began speaking, a low buzz grew louder. Heads turned. Guests shaded their eyes. The black drone appeared again, swooping in low, this time with a camera lens and flashing red light. It hovered directly above them. "Are you serious?" Melissa whispered, holding her bouquet like a shield. Jake's expression didn't change. He simply gave a nod. The best man stepped to the side and yanked open the small cage. Vaco surged upward like a shot of lightning in feather form. He didn't hesitate, didn't veer. The hawk zipped through the sky and locked onto the drone. The machine spun wildly in panic, then tried to shoot upward. Too late. Vo struck with surgical precision. A crack, a whir, a spinning fall, and the drone crashed just feet away from the dessert table. Guests erupted into cheers and applause. Someone yelled, "That's how you RSVP bird style." Melissa turned to Jake, wide-eyed. "Did you train Vo for this?" He shrugged. "He knows a threat when he sees one." And with that, the officiant cleared his throat and finished the sentence. "You may now kiss the bride." The kiss happened with drone, parts still sizzling in the grass, and a hawk circling overhead like a guardian angel in battle mode. The wedding went on, laughter echoing across the field. But while guests danced and toasted, and Vaco enjoyed a bowl of chopped lamb in the shade, Karen was already planning her next move, and Melissa, fixing her train, made a silent vow. If the HOA wanted a war, she and Jake were more than ready to fly into it. The next morning, the wedding still buzzed in everyone's mind, not just for the vows or the food, but because of the now viral video of Vaco attacking the drone mid-ceremony. By breakfast, the clip had reached over 50,000 views, and by noon, a local news outlet was asking for permission to air it. Melissa's cousin, who had recorded the whole thing on his phone, uploaded a slow-motion edit titled "When HOA Meets Talon Justice." And suddenly, their quiet farm wedding had turned into something of a national event. People were fascinated, amused, and infuriated on their behalf, but not everyone was laughing. Karen was already on the offensive. By early afternoon, a pair of animal control officers knocked on the farmhouse door, looking uncomfortable and slightly embarrassed. Jake answered with Vico perched calmly on his gloved arm, the bird majestic and silent like a feathered statue of defiance. One officer cleared his throat and explained that there had been a complaint filed about a violent hawk trained for aggressive acts. Melissa appeared behind Jake, holding a binder filled with certifications, permits, and veterinary letters proving Vaco's training and legal status as a licensed rescue and search bird. She had prepped that folder 2 weeks before the wedding just in case. The officers flipped through the papers, nodded, and apologized for the inconvenience. Before leaving, one of them asked sheepishly if he could take a photo with Jake allowed, it smiling slightly. But Karen wasn't finished. She called the sheriff's department next, claiming the wedding had broken noise ordinances and that the drone had been destroyed in an act of terrorism. Sheriff Wilcox, a patient man who had known Jake since he was in diapers, called to confirm what actually happened. Jake explained the situation plainly, and the sheriff laughed so hard he had to put him on hold. He later sent a text saying, "Tell Vaco he's deputized in spirit." But that humor was short-lived because the very next day, Karen did something none of them expected. She called an emergency HOA board meeting and passed what she called the bird ban ordinance. The ordinance, which she pushed through using a collection of bribes disguised as wellness vouchers and free HOA-sponsored landscaping packages, stated that no non-domesticated avian creature capable of autonomous flight would be permitted within HOA-designated airspace. The language was vague, the wording full of pseudo-legal fluff, and the implications were outrageous. Essentially, Karen was trying to criminalize birds within a 10-mi radius under the HOA's invisible thumb. Melissa stared at the printed ordinance like it had come from a satire website. Jake, always calm, read it over twice and quietly started a new document titled Counteroffensive. Meanwhile, the HOA Facebook page had turned into a battlefield. Comments were split between Karen's few remaining loyalists and a growing wave of residents who were tired of her antic. A photo of Karen standing with bits of her drone scattered on the lawn and hummus on her shirt became a meme almost instantly. One popular version read, "She aimed for control and got chicken salad." Another read, "Done attack level, Karen." But the more the internet laughed, the more aggressive Karen became. Craig Ever, her lapdog, posted an HOA-wide warning insisting any repeat of hawk-based hostility would result in fines, property reviews, and potential bans from community event. Melissa, now fully done with the passive-aggressive nonsense, logged into TikTok and posted a new video. She kept it calm, just her speaking directly to the camera, with Vico calmly perched behind her. She explained the situation, the harassment, the ordinance, and even showed parts of the ridiculous fine Craig had taped to their fence. She titled the video, "Birds Aren't Illegal, Karen Is." Within hours, it took off. The views doubled, then tripled. Comments flooded in from people all over the country who had dealt with overreaching HOAs and petty power trippers. It wasn't just about a bird anymore. It was about standing up to unjust control. The next twist came through an unexpected email. Melissa's cousin Sam, who worked in the city permit office, forwarded her a document that had been mistakenly CC'd to his inbox. It was a scanned agreement between the HOA and a private drone surveillance company. The contract dated back 4 months and detailed the deployment of commercial-grade drones throughout the neighborhood. The wedding, it turned out, had been the first field test for their new aerial monitoring initiative. Karen's real agenda was exposed. She was planning to use drones for neighborhood surveillance under the guise of security, and worse, she stood to profit from it. The contract revealed that Karen was the registered owner of a shell company listed as the consultant for the surveillance rollout. She had hoped to gain HOA approval after a few trial runs, but the VCO incident had blown that plan out of the sky, literally. Melissa and Jake sat in silence at the kitchen table as they read the contract. For a moment, they weren't sure whether to laugh or scream. Then Melissa stood up and said something that changed everything. "We're not just going to fight this, we're going to expose every feather of it." Together they compiled every piece of evidence they had: drone footage, ordnance scans, screenshots of Karen's inflammatory Facebook posts, video clips from the wedding, the drone contract, and the public HOA meeting note. Melissa edited it into a clear, factual video under her growing online persona, now titled "At Feather Red NC." The video ended with a slow zoom on VCO, sitting regally with the sunset behind him, overlaid with the words, "When the sky becomes a battleground, make sure you've got wings." The video exploded. News stations picked it up. Reporters began calling. A morning show requested a guest appearance. Jake declined, preferring to stay in the background, but Melissa agreed to go on, accompanied by Vo, perched on a leather stand. The segment aired nationally, and within days the HOA was under investigation by the city council. Melissa and Jake didn't just have public support, they had legal allies. A local attorney known for fighting HOA corruption offered to represent them pro bono. But while the world cheered, Karen was unraveling. She posted a frantic HOA update full of capital letters, bold text, and legal jargon that made no sense. She accused Melissa of media manipulation, Jake of bird brainwashing, and even suggested VACO might be an unauthorized military-grade weapon. It would have been funny if it weren't so desperate, but Karen wasn't done yet. In one last gasp of control, she filed a formal civil complaint against Jake and Melissa, accusing them of causing property damage, reputational harm, and violating the new ordinance. The letter arrived on a Monday morning, delivered by a courier who looked both embarrassed and exhausted. Jake read it silently, then handed it to Melissa. She read it once, twice, then set it down and looked out the window. VACO was gliding in wide circles above the lake, free and unbothered. Melissa turned to Jake and said softly, "It's time we show her what real damage looks like." The next phase wouldn't be about drones or birds or Facebook comment. It would be about truth, exposure, and showing Karen that no matter how hard she tried to control the sky, some things were simply meant to soar. Melissa sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open, and a half-drunk cup of coffee growing cold beside her. The civil complaint lay flat on the table like a challenge waiting to be accepted. It was a mess of full legal gibberish drafted by Karen and signed with a flourish like she was the queen of Ho-land. Jake read through it again, his face unmoved, calm in the way that always unnerved people who expected a reaction. "She's accusing us of inciting aerial warfare," he finally said, blinking slowly. "And psychological distress from a hawk." Melissa stared at him, deadpan. Apparently VACO is responsible for the emotional collapse of the HOA's reputation. Jake nodded, the edge of a smirk creeping across his face. He should start charging consultation fees. The ridiculousness of the complaint might have been funny if it weren't part of something deeper and far more calculated. Karen wasn't lashing out randomly. She was trying to control the narrative, twist public opinion, and ultimately silence them before they could expose her surveillance scheme. Melissa knew the only way to stop Karen was to blow the entire thing wide open, legally, publicly, and permanently. She got to work immediately, pulling together every piece of evidence they had into a single clean, organized file. She wasn't just thinking about revenge anymore. This was about setting an example. They contacted Mark Denslow, the HOA corruption attorney, who had offered to represent them. Mark had a reputation for being aggressive in court, especially against petty bureaucrats with inflated egos. He visited the farm the next morning and within 10 minutes declared they had enough to bury Karen in paperwork for years. "This is more than petty harassment," he said while flipping through the drone contract. "She's committing surveillance fraud, operating unauthorized commercial drones, and misappropriating HLA funds through a shell company. This isn't just a lawsuit, it's a takedown." Melissa liked him immediately. Jake wasn't one for legal theater, but he did have something else in mind. While Melissa and Mark built the civil countersuit, he called up a few friends from the wildlife and falconry community. He wanted to hold a public demonstration on their property to show how safe and controlled trained birds of prey actually were. It would be educational, family-friendly, and entirely open to the community, except for HOA board members, who would be explicitly disinvited. He titled the event "Wings Over the Farm" and sent out invites with a cheeky note. No drones allowed, unless they want to be feathers and wire. The day of the event arrived with clear skies and a crowd that nearly tripled what they expected. People came with folding chairs, picnic blankets, and their kids in tow. Jake and his colleagues flew a rotation of birds, owls, hawks, falcons, explaining their training, safety procedures, and emergency uses. Vaco was the star of the show, of course. When he did a slow, gliding dive through a hoop held by a 6-year-old, the crowd erupted in cheers. Melissa gave a speech halfway through, calm and professional, explaining the difference between responsible private land use and authoritarian overreach. Karen, watching through binoculars from the HOA property line, looked like she was about to burst into flames. She sent Craig to document the event from afar, hoping to gather more evidence of public disturbances, but Craig only lasted 20 minutes before buying a corn dog and clapping for a kestrel. Meanwhile, Melissa's speech had gone viral again. Someone had recorded it, added music, and posted it under the title, "When they try to clip your wings, you build a runway." The views skyrocketed. By the end of the day, a local reporter was on site asking Melissa for a follow-up interview, and a well-known civil liberties blogger reached out to publish a piece titled "Falconer versus HOA Tyrant." But the real bombshell dropped the next morning, when Melissa received an anonymous email. The subject line read, "You should see this." Attached was a PDF of HOA financials, unofficial but incredibly detailed. It broke down where Karen had funneled funds for community development and revealed exactly how her shell company had been billing the HOA for surveillance drone services under inflated maintenance charges. The data showed that nearly a third of the HOA's last 2 budget cycles had gone into Karen's secret operation. It even listed payments to her son's LLC, which supplied the drone parts. Melissa stared at the screen in stunned silence. This wasn't just fraud. This was deep, ugly corruption buried under layers of fake invoices and backdoor deals. She forwarded it to Mark instantly. Mark, upon receiving the file, drove over in record time and confirmed everything. "This is enough to trigger a full forensic audit," he said, eyes gleaming like a man who smelled blood in the water. "She's done. The moment this hits court, she'll be facing criminal charges, not just HOA complaints." They updated their countersuit, folded the new evidence into a digital archive, and prepared to file a formal petition with the local court for an injunction against Karen's surveillance activity. Melissa made one final video, calmly outlining the discovery. She didn't name Karen outright, but ended with a quote that left no doubt. "When someone builds a kingdom on fear, it only takes one hawk to show the sky still belongs to everyone." Karen responded predictably with a meltdown. She posted a rambling 6-paragraph screed on the HOA's message board, accusing Melissa of cybercrimes, calling Jake a wildlife terrorist, and claiming Vaco was a genetically altered military bird sent to spy on her. The post was so unhinged that HOA members began resigning in droves. Craig vanished from public view entirely. The HOA's vice president released a separate statement distancing himself from Karen's actions and calling for a full internal investigation. Suddenly, the same board that had stood by her was now pretending they'd never even liked her hummus. Melissa and Jake prepared for court. But the night before the first hearing, they hosted one last gathering at the farm. Close friends, family, neighbors, and even a few HOA members who'd once been Karen loyalists came to show support. They lit string lights between trees, played music, and served apple pie from Jake's grandmother's recipe. Vaco sat calmly on his perch, basking in the attention like a king, watching his subjects celebrate a long-earned peace. Melissa looked around at the smiling faces, the laughter, the pure joy rippling through the evening air, and felt something settle in her chest. She turned to Jake, who was watching her the way he always did, quietly, protectively, with a confidence that never demanded attention. "Tomorrow might be a storm," she said softly. Jake nodded. "Then let's fly above it." The sky was darkening and court would bring chaos. But in that moment, the only sound that mattered was the flap of wings in the breeze, a reminder that no matter how heavy the hand that tried to hold them down, freedom always found a way to rise. The courthouse steps felt colder than they should have for a spring morning. Melissa stood beside Jake, her fingers tightly wrapped around a folder thick with evidence and statements. Vaco wasn't with them. He remained at the sanctuary for safety. Reasons, but the weight of his presence still lingered in every movement they made. Reporters stood behind cordoned-off areas, camera lenses, and boom mics bobbing like vultures, waiting for a slip-up. Melissa held her head high. She wasn't walking in there as a bride or a schoolteacher. She was walking in as a citizen who had been pushed too far by a self-declared tyrant who mistook community leadership for personal dominion. Karen was already inside, flanked by two jittery-looking attorneys and her ever-silent assistant Craig, who appeared to have aged 10 years in the past 2 weeks. She wore a pale lavender blazer, pearl earrings, and a look of smug righteousness that cracked only slightly when she caught sight of Melissa entering. The courtroom was nearly full. HOA members, curious neighbors, news reporters, and even a few local officials had all shown up to witness what was quickly being called the most bizarre and anticipated civil case in the county's history. The bailiff called order as the judge. A wiry man with intelligent eyes named Judge Thorne took his seat. Karen's team opened with dramatic flair. Her attorney spun a tale of reckless endangerment, claiming that Jake had released a trained predator on public property and that the couple's viral fame had led to threats against the HO. They painted Karen as a misunderstood protector of the community, someone whose intentions had been distorted by internet trolls. But the cracks in their case began to show when the drone footage was played. The courtroom watched silently as the drone swooped. Into the wedding uninvited, hovered uncomfortably close, and then got torn from the sky by Vaco's expert maneuver. Audible laughter broke out in the gallery when the video froze on Karen's face meter splash. Judge Thorne called for order twice, fighting back a smirk himself. Then it was Mark's turn. Melissa and Jake's attorney approached with quiet precision. He didn't start with the wedding. He started with the contract. With a projector and a pointer, he laid out the timeline of Karen's secret surveillance scheme. The contract between the HOA and the drone company. The false shell company registered in Karen's name. The siphoned HOA funds and inflated service charges. Each slide revealed more deception. Each receipt, invoice, and email chipped away at her defense. By the time Mark pulled up the anonymous financial leak and showed the payment trail leading directly to Karen's son's company, the entire courtroom felt as if it were holding its breath. Karen's face was stoned, but her hands twitched. Her lawyer objected, claiming the files were illegally obtained. Judge Thorne allowed them anyway, noting the public interest involved and the corroborating evidence that had since surfaced from legitimate records. Then came Melissa's moment. Called to the stand, she answered every question with clarity and calm. She explained the harassment, the escalating intimidation, the drone's repeated intrusions, and the emotional toll it had taken. Her voice didn't crack until she described how it felt standing at the altar, hearing her vows drowned out by Karen's flying camera. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Jake followed his testimony, brief and focused. He described Vaco's training, the licensing, and the moment he saw the drone as a threat, not just to him, but to his guests and wife. He didn't speak dramatically. He didn't need to. His restraint said everything. When asked if Vaco had been trained to attack, he replied, "No, he was trained to intercept and protect, and that's exactly what he did." Mark concluded their argument by presenting a letter from the Falconry Association of North America, praising VCO's restraint and professionalism as a working bird. The jury visibly leaned in. As closing statements began, Karen suddenly stood and interrupted. Her voice cracked, not from emotion, but desperation. She claimed she had been set up, that Craig had misled her, that the contracts were altered. She said Melissa was obsessed with humiliating her, and that Jake had always hated her authority. The judge let her speak, but the courtroom's sympathy had long dried up. Craig, perhaps sensing the shift in wind, finally broke his silence. He stood from the defendant's table and muttered, "I have something to say." Judge Thorne allowed it. Craig took the stand and, for the first time in months, told the truth. He admitted that Karen had instructed him to fabricate HOA votes, that she had ghost-written the ordinance used to ban Vaco, and that the surveillance program had been her plan from the start. He had stayed quiet out of fear, but after seeing what she'd done to a simple wedding and how she tried to destroy people over a hawk, he couldn't stay silent any longer. Karen's face went white. Her lawyer's pen stopped moving. And with that, the courtroom shifted entirely. When the verdict came, it was unanimous. The court dismissed Karen's civil complaint against Melissa and Jake. The judge ruled in favor of their countersuit, citing invasion of privacy, intentional infliction of emotional distress, abuse of HOA authority, and unlawful surveillance. Karen was ordered to pay damages, legal fees, and was referred for a criminal investigation regarding misappropriation of funds and fraudulent business practices. The audience erupted into applause until the bailiff shouted for silence. Melissa felt the tension drain from her body like 1,000 lbs lifting all at once. Jake simply reached over and squeezed her hand. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them. Melissa made one short statement. "We didn't want to fight. We just wanted to be left alone." But when someone tries to fly over your life and claim your sky, you have every right to defend it. They declined interviews for the rest of the day. They didn't want more headlines or attention. They wanted peace. But peace, it turned out, came in strange packages. 2 days after the trial, the City Council suspended the HOA's operating license pending audit. Karen was removed from her position. Her home, once pristine, now had a small handmade sign out front left by a neighbor's kid that read, "Drone Queen, grounded." Craig resigned, moved out of the HOA's jurisdiction, and sent Jake a handwritten apology letter with a coffee shop gift card inside. Melissa and Jake celebrated quietly at home with family. Vaco was given a new leather band engraved with the words "Defender" of the vows. The ordeal had dragged them through stress, absurdity, and courtrooms. It had also shown them something unshakable about each other. They had stood shoulder to shoulder, not just through a wedding, but through an attempted takedown by someone who didn't know how to lose, and together they'd soared higher. As they watched the sunset that evening from the porch swing, Vaco glided. Overhead, his wings catching the golden light like a kite on fire. Jake wrapped his arm around Melissa and whispered, "Told you it'd be a wedding no one forgets." Melissa laughed softly, her head on his shoulder. "Next time," she said, "we get married in a cave." Jake smiled. "Only if the bats are properly licensed." But even as they joked, they knew the story wasn't quite over. Something told them Karen wouldn't disappear so easily. But whatever came next, they were ready, because now they had proof that sometimes all it takes to bring down a drone army is a bird with purpose and a couple who refuses to bow. A week after the trial, the farm felt quiet again, but not in the same way it used to. The silence now carried a weight of resolution of something that had been settled with finality. Melissa stood near the edge of the lake in a simple sundress, watching VCO trace wide, lazy circles overhead. He wasn't hunting, he was gliding purely for the joy of it, the way Jake had always said birds do when they know they're safe. The air had changed. No more buzzing drones, no more HOA letters stuffed in the mailbox, no more shadowy visits from clipboard-carrying men pretending to be officials. The battle was over, and the scars it left had already started to fade. But Melissa wasn't interested in forgetting it. Not completely. Some stories are meant to stay as reminders. Jake approached with a box under one arm. The kind of box used for keepsakes and odd treasures that don't quite belong anywhere else. He set it on the grass and knelt beside her. "Found this while clearing out the back shed," he said. "Thought you'd want to see it." Inside were printed copies of all the news stories, screenshots of the viral posts, even a frame still of the moment Vaco intercepted the drone mid-air. There was also the wedding guest book signed with notes like, "Best vows ever, especially the bird part, and next time invite the hawk to the reception too." Melissa smiled as she flipped through it all, her fingers brushing over pages that felt like chapters from a different life. But the most surprising item in the box was a letter. It was postmarked just 3 days ago and addressed to Melissa. The handwriting was stiff and formal, almost hesitant. She opened it carefully and read aloud, "Dear Melissa, I suppose it's pointless to say I regret how things unfolded, but I do. I never planned for it to go so far. I just wanted order, and I let control get mistaken for care. You and Jake stood up for something I didn't understand until it was too late. Maybe someday people will forgive me. Until then, I'll be cleaning bird cages, and I've started to think that maybe I deserve to. Sincerely, Karen." Melissa blinked at the last line. She read it again to make sure. There was no venom in the tone, no sarcasm hidden beneath the pen strokes, just exhaustion, and maybe for the first time honesty. Jake leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "Is she actually working at the sanctuary?" Melissa nodded slowly. "According to this, yes, community service. Hours assigned by the court." Jake let out a breath, half amusement, half disbelief. Poetic. They sat in silence for a moment before Melissa spoke again. "Do you think people like her ever really change?" Jake didn't answer right away. He reached into the box and pulled out a photo of Vaco standing triumphantly next to the broken drone shell. "I think sometimes the sky reminds you who it belongs to. Maybe some people just need to look up more often." That evening they hosted a small second ceremony. Not a wedding exactly, more like a celebration, just family, close friends, and the neighbors who had supported them through the insanity. They called it Wings Over the Farm, Redex. Tables were set under string lights. There was a local bluegrass band playing softly by the barn, and in the center of it all was a freshly carved perch, taller and more polished than the one from the wedding, etched with the words, "Defender of the Vows." Vaco stood proudly on it, as if he knew he was the honorary guest. The highlight of the evening wasn't the food or the speeches, but a surprise demonstration Jake had quietly arranged. Just as the sun began to dip behind the trees, he stepped into the middle of the field and whistled once. From the trees came not just Vico, but 4 other trained birds from the sanctuary, each one soaring in formation across the fading sky. They looped, circled, and dove with synchronized grace. The crowd gasped and clapped, many recording the spectacle with their phones. Melissa stood beside Jake, her heart swelling with pride, and something she hadn't fully allowed herself to feel until now. Relief. Real, unshakable relief. After the crowd had thinned and the last guest had driven off, Jake and Melissa sat by the fire pit, their hands wrapped around mugs of cider. The flames crackled, and VCO roost quietly nearby. The stars above them blinked slowly into existence, clean and clear, without a drone in sight. Melissa leaned against Jake's shoulder and whispered, "Do you realize we just made it through a war with the HO and came out the other side with a national audience?" Jake chuckled, and a Falcon-themed wedding album. They didn't talk about lawsuits or hearings or the surveillance scandal that had rocked the HOA into near dissolution. They didn't have to. The aftermath was already being handled by the city's legal team, and Karen, for the first time in her rule of fear, was being held accountable. The HLA board had called an emergency election and removed all members involved in the drone debacle. Several residents who once blindly followed Karen admitted their ignorance and even offered help repairing relationships around the community. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start. Sometimes justice is a slow process. Sometimes it needs feathers. Melissa posted one final video under the ATA Feathered Fiance account. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, just a calm recap of what had happened, what they'd learned, and what they hoped others would take from it. "You can't control every detail," she said near the end. "But you can protect what matters most, even if that means calling in backup with wings." The post trended for a few hours, then began to quiet down, as most viral stories eventually do. Melissa didn't mind. She was ready for peace. In the weeks that followed, Jake resumed his work with local youth programs, teaching kids about wildlife, survival, and respect for the natural world. Melissa returned to her art classroom, where her students now referred to her as Miss Falcon. One student even drew a cartoon of Vaco wearing a tiny judge's robe. It made her laugh so hard she framed it and hung it near her desk. Occasionally, people would stop them in town, recognizing them from the story, but those moments grew fewer and friendlier. The spotlight faded, and with it, the pressure. One unexpected afternoon, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a leather-bound journal, a new hawk glove embroidered with the initials J / and M, and a note that simply said, "Even the sky needs protectors. Thanks for reminding us." They never figured out who sent it. Melissa liked to believe it came from someone who watched the story unfold and saw in it a reflection of their own silent battles. Not everyone could fight a drone with a hawk, but everyone in some way knew what it meant to be under attack and stand their ground. Months later, on a calm summer day, Jake and Melissa walked the same path they had taken before the wedding, past the oak tree and toward the lake's edge. Vaco soared high above, just a dot in the blue. Melissa reached down and picked up a stone, skipping it across the water. Jake smiled. "What now?" he asked. She thought for a moment. "We build something no one can fly over." He raised an eyebrow. "Like a fort." She laughed. "No, like a life. Strong, simple, rooted, untouchable." He nodded with a watchful eye in the sky. They stood there in comfortable silence as VCO dipped low, catching a current, then rising again. No interference, no buzzing, no warnings from above, just air, freedom, and the quiet pride of two people who had proven that no matter how small the stage or how absurd the fight, courage always finds its way into the light. And when the sky turns hostile, sometimes the best answer isn't louder noise,